Welcome to our deep dive into interesting topics. Today we're tackling the Cybersecurity Roadmap Web Specialization. This is really a crucial framework for keeping web applications secure in today's world, with all the evolving threats. And it comes from work compiled by Jörg-Owe.
Yeah, and it's fascinating, isn't it, how vital this kind of specialization has become, especially now. I mean, the huge shift to remote work, everything moving to the cloud.
Yeah.
It's really flipped the security playbook.
It really has.
We just can't only react to problems anymore. You absolutely need a plan.
Exactly. It feels like, not that long ago, the approach was sort of like playing whack-a-mole with security threats, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this specialization, it's all about getting ahead of the curve, like anticipating what might happen. And when you think about the kinds of attacks aimed at web applications, things like XSS, SQL Injection, they're just getting more sophisticated.
They absolutely are. And this isn't just about dealing with attacks, when they happen. It's about identifying the weak spots beforehand, having a solid plan for when something does go wrong, and really building security smarts right into the DNA of how we develop web apps.
Okay, but putting one of these roadmaps together, it sounds like a bit of a delicate balancing act. It can't be easy.
That's a really key point. It is about finding that sweet spot where security is strong, but it doesn't make things so difficult that people can't actually use the web applications.
Right.
Then you've got the ever-increasing pile of regulations you need to comply with.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe the biggest challenge of all, making security a core part, like truly integrated into how software gets built from the ground up.
Okay, let's unpack this Cybersecurity Roadmap Web Specialization a bit then. Our goal here is really to pull out the essential ideas so you, our listener, can quickly understand what goes into a solid strategy for keeping those web applications safe.
Sounds good. Let's maybe start with the bigger picture first. How do these cybersecurity roadmaps even become such a thing? They haven't always been around,
Right. That move towards remote work and cloud systems really put the pedal to the metal, didn't it?
Mm.
In terms of meeting these kinds of roadmaps, it definitely forced security teams to level up their game and fast.
Yeah, and what's interesting is the initial approach, for many organizations, it was reactive. Something bad would happen, and then they'd scramble to fix it.
Mm-hmm.
But as attacks got more frequent, more clever, it just became obvious that waiting for disaster wasn't sustainable.
And web applications, just because they're so central now to how businesses run, they became huge targets. All those online forms, the connections.
Yeah.
It creates a lot of potential openings for attackers.
Exactly. And with more people working remotely, those vulnerabilities were, magnified. It became crystal clear that generic security wasn't enough. You needed specific strategies, laser-focused on securing web applications.
To avoid those big financial hits, the reputational damage.
Precisely. That's when these detailed roadmaps really started to become essential, kind of guiding organizations towards more forward-thinking security.
So when we talk about a cybersecurity roadmap, what are the actual key ingredients, like the essential components?
Okay, well, right at the heart of any strong roadmap is risk assessment. This is really where you figure out what the potential threats are and, where your weaknesses might lie.
So identifying all the doors and windows an attacker might try? Finding those vulnerabilities before the bad guys do.
That's it, exactly. And a crucial part of this isn't just listing every single possible problem. It's actually figuring out which weaknesses are the most likely to be exploited and which ones would cause the most damage if they were.
So prioritizing.
Yes, prioritization is key. It helps you focus your efforts, your resources when you're developing those mitigation strategies.
Which are the things that actually protect you, right? Like firewalls, encryption.
Access controls, yeah.
Yeah.
All those protective measures.
Okay, that makes sense. Know your biggest risks to put your energy in the right places. What's the next piece of the puzzle?
Right. So after you've figured out your risks, you absolutely need an incident response plan. This is basically your emergency playbook for when a cyber attack actually happens. It lays out step by step what needs to be done.
So who's in charge of what? How do you stop the bleeding? How do you get things back to normal? That kind of thing.
Exactly that. The plan needs to clearly define roles and responsibilities. And what's interesting here, and really important, is that just having the plan isn't enough.
You have to practice it.
You have to practice it regularly. Run drills, simulations, whatever you want to call it, just to make sure everyone knows what to do when the pressure's really on, and, crucially, that the plan actually works.
Okay, so you know it could go wrong. You have a plan for when it does. What else is critical for a solid roadmap?
Security policies. These are another fundamental element. Think of them as the overarching rules, the guidelines your organization puts in place to govern how security is handled, almost like the constitution for your security practices.
So this covers everything, from how strong passwords need to be to how you handle sensitive data.
Precisely. And this specialization really stresses you need both those broad general policies and more specific ones that address the unique security points of the different technologies you use.
Okay.
And what's really important, these policies can't just be documents gathering dust on a shelf,
Right.
They need regular reviews, updates to stay relevant. They have to be clear, enforceable. Employees need to be able to find them, understand them.
And they have to link to the actual security measures you have in place.
Absolutely. They need to map directly to your security controls.
That makes perfect sense. Rules are only useful if people know them and follow them. Which I guess brings us to
employee training and awareness. Exactly. Because no matter how many fancy security gadgets you have, people can still be the weakest link if they're not aware of the threats.
Absolutely. We've all heard about those emails, right? The ones that look legitimate but are actually phishing scams.
And that's precisely why regular security awareness training is so crucial. It helps reinforce those policies we just talked about, and it teaches employees how to spot and avoid potential threats. The specialization even mentions running simulated phishing exercises.
Oh, like sending fake phishing emails to see who clicks.
Yeah, it's a really effective way to see where your team might be vulnerable and, where more training might be needed.
Okay, so risks assessed, response plan ready, rules in place, team trained. Is that the whole picture? Are we done?
Not quite. Security is definitely an ongoing effort, not a one-off task, and that's where continuous monitoring comes in.
Okay, so it's not just set it and forget it.
Not at all. Continuous monitoring is all about keeping a constant eye on your systems in real time, looking for anything suspicious even after your applications are up and running live.
How does that work in practice?
Well, it often involves using something called a SIEM tool, security information and event management. Think of a SIEM as like a central security detective. It collects logs and event data from all your different systems.
Like servers, firewalls, applications.
Exactly. And then it analyzes all that data, looking for unusual patterns or anomalies that might indicate an attack is happening or has happened.
So it's like a central hub, constantly watching for any red flags across the board.
That's a great way to put it. The specialization even points to specific tools like AWS CloudTrail or Azure Monitor for tracking activity in cloud environments, giving you that crucial visibility who's accessing what changes are being made, things like that.
Okay, got it. And the last key component you mentioned is
compliance and regulatory frameworks. These are basically the external rules and laws you have to follow. It depends heavily on your industry, where you operate, what kind of data you handle.
Right, things like GDPR for protecting personal data in Europe, or HIPAA for healthcare information in the U.S.
Exactly, those kinds of things. Staying compliant is absolutely vital, not just to avoid potentially hefty fines, but more importantly, to make sure you're protecting sensitive information the way you're legally obligated to.
And that requires ongoing effort too, I imagine.
Definitely. Regular checks, assessments to make sure you're meeting those requirements, and just a solid commitment to best practices for keeping data safe.
So these 6 pieces, understanding risks, the response plan, clear security rules, training people, constant monitoring, and staying compliant, they all fit together.
Precisely. They form the foundation of a strong cybersecurity roadmap. And the Cybersecurity Roadmap Web Specialization then takes these core ideas and dives deeper into how they specifically apply to the unique world of web applications.
Okay, let's zoom in on those web specialization focus areas then. What makes securing web applications different? What are the specific angles here?
Well, the specialization highlights several key areas. First off, there's cyber policy and security. And it's interesting, it mentions connections to the Cyber Policy Center and CSAC at Stanford's FSI,
Okay.
which really emphasizes how important the legal and regulatory side is for web security and data privacy. Understanding all this different international laws, regulations, standards.
So getting the legal landscape right for web security is fundamental. What about the more technical stuff?
Right, that brings us straight to secure coding practices. This is absolutely essential for web apps. The main goal here is pretty straightforward.
Right.
Prevent those really common web vulnerabilities.
Like those XSS and SQL injection attacks we mentioned earlier, the ones attackers love to use.
Exactly those. The specialization really hammers home the need for strong input validation. Think of it like carefully checking everything that users or other systems send into your web application, making sure it's safe before you process it or store it.
Got it. Check it at the store.
Yeah. And then there's output encoding. This is about making sure anything your web application displays back to a user's browser is rendered safely. So it can't be misinterpreted as code and executed.
Can you give an example?
Sure.
Yeah.
The classic one is if someone enters malicious script tags, like script-taler XSS script, into a comment box or a form field. Without proper output encoding, that little bit of JavaScript could actually run in another user's browser when they view the comment.
Ouch.
Yeah. But with proper encoding, the browser just displays the literal text script-taler XSS script, treating it as harmless data, not executable code.
That really paints a clear picture.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so besides writing secure code, what other web-specific areas does this specialization cover?
Well, it revisits risk assessment and incident response, but specifically tailored to web apps. The core principles are the same. Find the threats, have a plan, but the details focus on the unique vulnerabilities and attack vectors you see in web environments.
Like specific web server misconfigurations or API weaknesses.
Exactly. And similarly, security awareness and training gets a web focus. There's a big emphasis on teaching people how to spot phishing attacks that might specifically target, say, their login credentials for important web applications, or try to trick them into revealing sensitive data through a fake website.
Makes sense. Train people for the online threats they're most likely to actually encounter day to day.
Then we have continuous monitoring and secure access, again, specifically for web apps. This includes using tools like User and Entity Behavior Analytics, or UEBA. Yeah. Imagine UEBA as a system that learns what normal activity looks like within your web applications, who logs in when, from where, what actions they typically take, and then it flags anything that seems unusual or deviates significantly from that baseline. Could be a sign of a compromised account or an ongoing attack.
So it's looking for weird behavior.
Pretty much. And for secure access to web resources, it highlights solutions like VPNs, but also newer approaches like Zero Trust Network Access, or ZTNA.
Zero trust. That's the never trust, always verify idea, right?
That's the one. Making sure every connection request is authenticated and authorized, regardless of whether it's coming from inside or outside the network.
And finally, the specialization touches on something that feels increasingly critical these days.
Absolutely. Open source component security. This is huge. Modern web applications rely heavily on pre-built open source code libraries and frameworks. Saves a ton of time, right?
Sure. Everyone uses them.
But these components can sometimes have security flaws themselves. Maybe a vulnerability is discovered later on, so it's crucial to keep track of which open source components you're using, actively monitor them for any known vulnerabilities, and make sure you update them promptly when patches are available.
So managing your software supply chain, essentially.
Exactly. The specialization points out this is especially important in industries like retail, healthcare, and education, where open source adoption is often really high.
Right. So it's not just about the code your team writes, but also the security of all the building blocks you're incorporating.
You got it. Now, the specialization also talks about broader best practices in cybersecurity, and naturally, a lot of these have direct applications or nuances for web security.
Okay, let's highlight some of those best practices, but specifically through that web security lens.
Sure. So regular audits and risk assessments, when you apply that to web security, it really means emphasizing checks for compliance with web-related regulations, like data privacy laws. And specifically hunting for vulnerabilities common in web environments, think OWASP Top 10 type risks.
Got it. And what about data protection?
Data protection by design and by default becomes critical for web apps. This means really integrating things like data protection impact assessments, or DPIAs, right into your web development lifecycle. Thinking about privacy implications from the very start of any new web project or feature, not just as an afterthought.
So baking data privacy into the web development DNA, like you said earlier about security.
Precisely. Then there's involvement of key stakeholders. For web security, this highlights the need for really close collaboration. You need the developers, the security team, operations, maybe legal, product owners, all working together. It can't be siloed.
Everyone needs to be on the same page.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, continuous monitoring and incident response for web apps means specifically tuning your monitoring. Like configuring those SIEM tools we talked about to really understand web application logs, HTTP traffic, API calls, and having incident response playbooks that are specifically designed to handle web-based attacks, like a large-scale DDoS attack or a web defacement.
And the human element again, accountability.
Still vital. Accountability and training in a web context means ensuring developers understand secure coding isn't optional, it's part of their job. And making sure anyone involved with the web applications, maybe even content editors or marketers, understands their role in security and is trained on recognizing web-specific threats they might encounter.
Okay, now, to actually do all of this, organizations obviously need the right
Tools and technologies, exactly. And the specialization highlights some really interesting ones that are particularly relevant for web security.
like the role of AI. Is that becoming more prominent?
Yes, definitely. The integration of AI and machine learning is a big one. We're seeing AI used more and more for automatically detecting complex web threats, maybe spotting subtle anomalies that humans might miss, and even helping to neutralize attacks faster.
Interesting. What else?
There's talk of seamless integration techniques, things like adaptive authentication, where the level of security challenge might change based on context like location or device, or contextual access controls for web apps. The goal is making security stronger without adding too much friction for legitimate users.
Making security less of a headache is always good.
Absolutely. Then you have compliance and governance tools. These can be integrated right into the development pipeline, the CI/CD process. They can automatically check code or configurations against security policies or regulatory requirements before things get deployed.
Catching problems earlier.
Exactly. And there are specific secure development tools for web developers. Things like static analysis, SD tools that scan code for vulnerabilities as it's written, dynamic analysis, data tools that test running applications, vulnerability scanners, even IDE plugins that offer real-time security feedback.
Helping developers build security in from line one.
That's the idea. And never forget, user education and awareness tools and platforms remain critical, especially for training on those web-specific threats like sophisticated phishing emails, social engineering tactics targeting web users, things like that.
And we see these tools being used in the real world, right? The specialization mentions.
Yes, the real-world application section gives concrete examples, like two-factor authentication, 2FA, being pretty much standard now for protecting access to important websites and online accounts. And it also highlights the importance of adhering to established standards, like the OWASP Top 10. That's the list from the Open Web Application Security Project outlining the most critical security risks facing web applications. It's a really valuable guide.
Okay. Now, even with all these tools and best practices, it's not all smooth sailing, is it? There are still challenges.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The specialization is realistic about that. It outlines several key challenges and solutions in web security. One that keeps coming up is that constant balancing act between usability and security for web apps.
We touched on that earlier.
Yeah. Security measures need to be strong, but if they make the application incredibly difficult or frustrating to use, people will find workarounds. Or just avoid using it if they can.
So the solution involves
really focusing on user-centric design for security features, doing usability testing specifically on the security controls to make sure they're effective, but also reasonably intuitive.
You don't want security that people actively try to bypass.
Exactly. Another major challenge is simply identifying and mitigating vulnerabilities in web applications. It's a constant battle. This includes the risks from unpatched software, maybe an old version of a web server or a library with known flaws.
Right.
And also misconfigured systems. Simple mistakes in setup can leave big holes. The specialization also notes an increase in attacks targeting edge devices, things like load balancers or CDNs, which are part of the web infrastructure.
So what's the solution there?
It comes back to those fundamentals. Regular, thorough risk assessments focused on the web environment, solid incident response plans, and truly integrating security thinking throughout the entire web development lifecycle. Vigilance, really.
And keeping up with all the different rules and regulations must be tough, too.
Indeed. Compliance and regulatory challenges related to web data are significant and constantly changing. The key, as the specialization suggests, is seeing compliance not as a one-time project, but as a continuous process. You need ongoing review and updates to your web data handling practices, all backed up by strong web security policies and really detailed documentation to prove you're doing the right things.
And that challenge of getting security embedded early in development.
Absolutely. Embedding security into development processes for web apps remains a hurdle for many. Promoting frameworks like the Secure Software Development Lifecycle, SSDLC, is crucial. And encouraging practices like regular penetration testing, where you hire ethical hackers to try and break into your web systems, and performing frequent security audits are vital components of the solution.
The specialization also gives us a look at how some organizations are actually putting this into practice. through some.
Yes, the case studies provide some useful practical examples. It mentions a financial institution using the well-known NIST cybersecurity framework specifically for their web security planning and risk management.
Okay.
There's a tech company that integrated those data protection impact assessments, DPIAs, right into their standard process for any new web-related projects.
Being proactive about privacy.
Exactly. An e-commerce platform that significantly improved its incident response plan after experiencing a web attack, learning from the event, and a healthcare provider that developed a specific training program to help staff recognize phishing attempts, targeting their web portals and patient data systems.
These real-world examples really help ground the discussion, don't they? Show why this matters.
They do. It shows organizations are actively grappling with these issues and finding ways forward using these roadmap principles.
Finally, then, let's look ahead. What does the future hold? What future trends are shaping the landscape of web security?
The specialization highlights a few key areas to watch. First, inevitably, the evolving threat landscape. Attacks aren't standing still. We expect to see even more sophisticated malware, ransomware targeting web servers and data, and increasingly clever social engineering tactics aimed at web application users.
So the arms race continues.
Pretty much. This means enhanced threat intelligence capabilities, understanding the latest attack methods will become even more critical. Customer expectations are definitely rising. Users, clients, partners. They increasingly expect proactive and comprehensive security measures to be in place for the web applications they interact with. Security is becoming a differentiator.
People care more about their data and online safety.
They absolutely do. And thirdly, technological innovations. We already touched on AI and machine learning. These technologies are expected to significantly change, maybe even revolutionize, web application security testing. Imagine AI systems that can automatically identify complex vulnerabilities much faster than manual testing, or even predict likely future attack vectors based on emerging trends.
That sounds both powerful and, frankly, necessary given the evolving threats.
It does. It suggests the tools and techniques we use for web security will continue to advance rapidly.
It definitely sounds like the world of web security is going to remain dynamic and incredibly important for the foreseeable future.
Absolutely. It's not an area where you can afford to stand still.
Okay, so to wrap up our deep dive today into the Cybersecurity Roadmap Web Specialization, based on the work by Jörg-Owe, it seems crystal clear that taking a proactive, structured, and comprehensive approach is just essential for keeping web applications secure in today's environment. We've talked through the key parts of a cybersecurity roadmap, risk assessment, incident response, policies, training, monitoring, compliance.
Yeah, and how those specifically apply in the web context: secure coding, open source security, web-focused monitoring.
Right. Plus the best practices, the tools and technologies, those persistent challenges, and how to approach them.
The real-world examples, and it glimpses into future trends like AI's growing role.
What's really fascinating, I think, is seeing how all these different pieces have to work together. It's not just one thing. It's a whole system.
It really is. A system designed to build a strong, adaptable defense against threats that are themselves constantly changing and adapting.
Exactly. And it really underscores that need to move beyond just reacting to attacks after they happen, and instead really build security into every single stage of how web applications are designed, built, and operated.
And maybe this raises a final thought, something for you, our listener, to consider. Think about how the principles we've discussed today, this idea of a proactive roadmap, understanding risks, being prepared, how might that apply to your own digital life? Even if you're not managing enterprise web applications, how do you approach security for the web services you use every day? Are you taking those proactive steps?
That's definitely some good food for thought. A reminder that security awareness applies to all of us online. Well, this exploration of web security roadmaps was based on the insightful work compiled by Jörg-Owe. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.